The studio lights blazed with the kind of intensity that only live television could create. Every face in the audience leaned forward, waiting for the next blow in what had already become one of the most heated political exchanges of the year. Then, without warning, Representative Jasmine Crockett delivered a line so sharp, so perfectly timed, that the room seemed to shatter around it. Her words cut through the noise like a lightning bolt. Kash Patel, the seasoned political brawler, who had strutted into the studio with trademark confidence, suddenly froze. His smirk dissolved. His reply never came. For the first time in the broadcast, silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a weapon the audience gasped in unison. Camera lenses zoomed in, desperate to capture every flicker of Patel's unraveling expression. The host's eyebrows shot up, eyes darting between the two combatants like a referee who had just witnessed a knockout punch. Social media feeds lit up in real time as viewers scrambled to clip post, share what would soon become one of the most replayed political mic drops of the season. It was a moment that didn't just belong to the debate. It belonged to the culture. Crockett had taken the role of the underdog, the underestimated voice, and transformed the stage into her battleground. And with one sentence, she seized it. Patel's decades of experience, his swagger, his carefully rehearsed talking, points all of it evaporated under the weight of a single savage comeback. The cameras froze. Kash Patel had no words. The shock was electric. Somewhere in that stunned silence, reputations shifted, narratives cracked. And history, at least in the world of political television, took a turn. But here's the question that gripped millions of viewers. How did it come to this? What chain of arrogance, tension, and rising stakes led to Patel's most humiliating moment on live TV? And what made Crockett's counterattack so devastating, so unforgettable, that it would ripple across America long after the cameras stopped rolling? What happened next would not just leave a studio audience in disbelief, would leave an entire nation talking. The cameras panned across the studio, capturing the energy of an event that was far more than just another televised debate. This was primetime America. Millions tuned in, scrolling through their phones, live tweeting every barb, every smirk, every stumble. The stage had been set not merely for discussion, but for battle. The question wasn't just who would speak. Louder it was who would emerge with their credibility intact. On one side sat Kash Patel, former government insider and relentless partisan warrior. His confidence radiated like armor. He leaned back in his chair with that half-smile, the kind of expression that seemed rehearsed for the cameras. To his supporters, Patel was a fighter for truth. To his critics, he was a spin master, an architect of narratives designed to distract and distort. Tonight, he believed the stage belonged to him. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett. Younger, newer to the national spotlight, often underestimated by her opponents. She didn't wear arrogance like armor. Instead, she carried the quiet strength of someone who had lived the struggles she spoke about. Crockett wasn't supposed to dominate this arena. At least that's what her detractors thought. They saw her as an underdog, a rookie stepping into a ring built for veterans. But underdogs have a way of rewriting the story. The stakes stretched far beyond. Two individuals trading words. Patel represented the machinery of political spin, the kind that thrives on spectacle, misdirection, and intimidation. Crockett represented authenticity, the voice of those tired of empty rhetoric, tired of watching power serve itself.
What?
Unfolded on this stage was more than a clash of personalities. It was a battle between truth and deception, dignity and arrogance, reality and theater. The host welcomed both sides. The lights dimmed slightly, and the questions began to fly. Early exchanges were sharp, but controlled. Patel interrupted often, his tone dripping with condescension. He smirked after each jab, clearly convinced that Crockett couldn't keep pace. He gestured broadly, looking to the audience for validation, as if daring them not to agree. Crockett, by contrast, stayed composed. She spoke with measured precision, letting her arguments land with calm conviction. She didn't chase Patel's interruptions. She outlasted them. Yet behind her calm, a storm was gathering. One that no one in the studio yet realized was about to break. Viewers at home could feel the tension climbing. Tweets were already flying, Patel steamrolling, Crockett holding her own watch. This space, Commentators on rival networks prepared their talking points, confident they knew how the evening would play out. The consensus was simple. Patel had the upper hand. He was too experienced, too media-savvy, too ruthless. But confidence can be a dangerous mask. The more Patel pressed, the more the audience began to shift uneasily in their seats. Something about his smug interruptions carried an undertone of desperation, as though he was performing rather than debating. Crockett, however, seemed to absorb the blows with an almost unnerving patience. It was a patience that would soon pay off. The moderator turned to Patel with another question, one he believed would let him seize the narrative once and for all. Patel leaned forward, ready to deliver what he thought would be the night's decisive blow. He sharpened his words, rehearsed them in his mind, and smirked as he prepared to land yet another jab. But he had no idea that the ground beneath him was already shifting. Because in just a moment, Crockett would unleash a response so precise, so devastating, it would leave Patel and the millions watching utterly, speechless. No one in the room could predict what was about to unfold. To understand why this televised clash hit so hard, you first have to understand the man at its center, Kash Patel, to some. Patel is a sharp legal mind, a skilled operator who rose quickly through the ranks of Washington's most cutthroat corridors. To others, he is the embodiment of everything. Americans' fear about political insiders, ambitious, entitled, and willing to bend truth until it breaks. Patel's rise was meteoric. A lawyer by training, he maneuvered his way into the orbit of power during one of the most turbulent political eras in recent memory. He became a trusted lieutenant to figures who thrived on disruption, proudly branding himself as a fighter who wasn't afraid to take on the establishment. But with that reputation came a darker image, not as a truth-teller, but as a man who knew how to weaponize narrative. He gained a loyal following for his combative style, often appearing on television, to defend controversial decisions and discredit opponents. His language was sharp, his tone dripping with certainty. To his base, it was refreshing. To his critics, it was reckless. Again and again, Patel seemed less interested in building bridges and more invested in burning them. The spotlight became his fuel and controversy, his currency, and it worked for a time. His allies praised him as fearless. He was invited into rooms most Americans would never see, wielding influence far beyond what his official title suggested. But behind the swagger, contradictions mounted. Patel often positioned himself as a crusader for truth, yet critics accused him of spinning half-truths and conspiracies. He railed against corruption, yet aligned himself with power structures many believed were corrupt to their core. Therein lies the irony. Patel styled himself as a warrior against the deep state, yet in doing so, he became the very kind of power broker he claimed to despise. His public persona was crafted on defiance, but privately, is whispered. About a man obsessed with loyalty tests and image control, the arrogance grew. By the time he sat across from Jasmine Crockett, on that fateful night, Patel believed he had the upper hand. He had faced down reporters, congressmen, and critics far more seasoned than her. He had weathered investigations, scandal headlines, and public backlash, always emerging with that same half-smile, as if to say, "You can't touch me." But what makes a downfall so compelling is not just the fall itself, it's the blindness that precedes it. Patel had grown so accustomed to dominating his opponents that he failed to notice the shift happening right in front of him. Crockett wasn't rattled by his interruptions. She wasn't flustered by his dismissive smirks. She was waiting, watching, letting him build the rope he didn't realize was already tightening around him, like so many who rise quickly on confidence. In combativeness, Patel overlooked the power of composure. He mistook patience for weakness, humility for inexperience. And in that miscalculation, he revealed something more dangerous than arrogance. He revealed fragility. Because when you brand yourself as untouchable, even the smallest crack can look like a collapse. In that studio, Patel's contradictions were laid bare. He claimed to fight for the people, yet spoke in a way that dismissed those who disagreed with him. He preached strength, yet leaned on insults rather than substance. Framed himself as the voice of truth, yet relied on distortion to make his case. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, carried the weight of a man who had built his persona on shaky ground, and as fate would have it, Crockett was about to deliver the exact line that exposed those cracks for the nation to see. This is the cruel symmetry of politics. Arrogance can make a man rise quickly, but it can also make him blind to the very moment his downfall begins. Patel's story was never just about one debate or one clash. It was about a career built on conflict, reaching its most public unraveling. The audience didn't yet know it, but the stage had already tilted. Patel, once the confident aggressor, was seconds away from being recast in the nation's eyes, not as the fighter he fancied himself, but as the villain undone by his own overconfidence. And it would take just one sentence, delivered calmly by an underestimated opponent, to flip his entire image upside down. If Kash Patel's backstory was one of arrogance rising into power, Jasmine Crockett's was the opposite. Hers was a journey carved out of grit, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in justice. She wasn't born into the spotlight. She wasn't handed influence or power. Every step she took toward that studio stage was hard-earned, fueled not by ego, but by purpose. Crockett began her career not with cameras pointed at her, but in courtrooms, where ordinary people faced extraordinary odds. A lawyer by training, she chose not the comfortable cases, but the difficult ones, defending the marginalized, the voiceless, the forgotten. Day after day, she stood in rooms stacked against her, where the rules seemed written to ensure her clients would lose. And yet, she fought, tirelessly, relentlessly. This wasn't just about practicing law. It was about living her conviction that justice must be accessible to all, not just the powerful. Every late night combing through case files, every early morning meeting clients who had no one else to defend them, every victory earned against the odds, these moments hardened her spirit and sharpened her resolve. They also taught her something Patel never learned. True strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from standing the firmest. As the years passed, Crockett's work began to echo beyond the courtroom. Activism called her name. She marched, she organized, she spoke out when silence would have been easier. In communities bruised by inequality and ignored by those in power, she became a rare figure, someone who both understood the pain and had the courage to challenge the system causing it. But that path was anything but smooth. Crockett faced the whispers, the doubts, the dismissals. Too inexperienced, too fiery, not polished enough. She was underestimated at every turn, written off as someone who might make noise but would never last in the brutal world of politics. Yet those very underestimations became her fuel. Each sneer, each condescending smile only made her sharper, steadier, and more determined to prove that authenticity and courage could triumph over cynicism. When she entered political office, Crockett carried all of that with her: the courtroom grit, the activist fire, and the scars of countless uphill battles. She didn't walk into politics to collect titles or photo ops. She walked in to keep fighting for the very people she had been fighting for all along. And though the halls of power were colder, harsher, and riddled with gamesmanship, she remained, rooted in something no opponent could shake: her authenticity. That authenticity became her greatest strength. While others rehearsed talking points and poll-tested every phrase, Crockett spoke plainly, directly, and with conviction. She didn't cloak her words in political jargon. She didn't hide behind consultants. What she said was what she believed, and audiences, whether they agreed with her or not, could sense it. And it was that authenticity, that refusal to perform or posture, that made her so dangerous to someone like Patel. Because unlike him, she didn't need the spotlight to survive. She had already proven herself in the shadows, long before the cameras ever rolled. What makes a hero compelling is not perfection, but the road they've traveled to get to the moment of confrontation. Crockett had stumbled, had taken hits, had been underestimated, But each challenge had prepared her for exactly what was about to unfold in that studio. Every courtroom taught her how to remain composed under fire. Every rally taught her how to speak truth, even when outnumbered. Every doubt hurled her way. Taught her how to stand tall when others tried to diminish her, so when Kash Patel smirked, when he tried to bulldoze her with arrogance, he had no idea he was walking into a trap. Not a trap laid by manipulation, but by Crockett's lived resilience. He was about to clash with a woman who had been underestimated her entire career, and who had learned to turn that underestimation into her most powerful weapon. The beauty of Crockett's story is that it resonates far beyond politics. It is the story of anyone who has ever been talked over, dismissed, or overlooked. It is the story of those who have had to fight twice as hard to be heard, only to discover that their scars were not weaknesses but armor. That was why, in that split second before she delivered her mic drop line, millions watching could feel the tension shift. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was something bigger, a moment of poetic justice, years in the making. Patel had the confidence of someone who thought the world bent to him. Crockett had the calm of someone who knew the truth didn't need theatrics to stand tall. And when those two forces collided under the blinding studio lights, the world was about to see which one held real power, because Crockett wasn't just a lawyer. She wasn't just a politician. She wasn't just another talking head in a panel debate. She was the embodiment of resilience, a fighter forged in the fires of struggle, underestimated until the very moment she could no longer be ignored. And as Patel soon discovered, that kind of hero doesn't just fight back. They change the game entirely. The opening minutes of the segment carried a familiar rhythm. Kash Patel leaned forward in his chair, eyes flashing with the self-assurance of someone convinced the spotlight was his alone. From the moment the host posed the first question, Patel seized control, talking over his fellow guest, waving his hands with performative outrage, and sprinkling his remarks with the smug grin of a man who believed interruption equaled dominance. Jasmine Crockett sat just a few feet away, composed, steady, and crucially immoved. Where Patel's energy was frenetic, hers was measured. Where he jabbed with sarcasm, she countered with clarity. And though the audience couldn't yet sense it, the contrast between the two wasn't just stylistic. It was the very fault line on which the night's drama would erupt. Patel interrupted again. It's just wrong. Jasmine completely wrong. His voice sliced through hers mid-sentence, dismissing her point before she could finish. The cameras caught the flicker in her eyes. Not anger, but calculation. She let him finish, folded her notes calmly, and replied in a tone that was sharper for its restraint. Kash, if you'd like to give a monologue instead of a debate, perhaps the network should book you a solo special. The audience chuckled. It wasn't a roar of laughter, just a ripple, but enough to shift the air. Patel forced a smile, brushing it off, but the first crack had formed. The tension built with every exchange. Patel's strategy was clear. Overwhelm Crockett with volume, smother her with interruptions, and project dominance through sheer persistence. He smirked when she spoke, raised his eyebrows theatrically, and even leaned back in his chair as if her arguments were beneath him. Yet Crockett refused to mirror his antics. Dead, she struck with precision, short, substantive points that pierced through the noise. Facts are stubborn things, she said at one point, cutting cleanly through Patel's spin. Respectfully. Your record contradicts your claim. She pressed in another, slipping in a subtle blade without raising her voice. The audience began to lean forward, caught between the bombast of Patel and the quiet resilience of Crockett. The host glanced from one guest to the other, the tension thick enough to hum through the studio lights. Camera operators panned to audience members, their eyes widening as they sensed the inevitability of a collision. Patel, however, only grew. More emboldened, his interruptions turned sharper, his dismissals more overt. At one point, he waved his hand in Crockett's direction, as if to erase her mid-sentence. You don't understand how Washington really works, he scoffed, dripping. With condescension, Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned ever so slightly forward, her voice calm but firm. What I understand, Kash, is that truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. Another ripple from the audience. The tension wasn't just between the two debaters. Anymore, it was in the room itself. Could feel the split. One half waiting for Patel to land a knockout blow. The other waiting for Crockett to flip the script. And Patel, blinded by his own confidence, couldn't see the trap he was walking into. He mistook her composure for weakness, her restraint for hesitation. He thought he was winning. The debate escalated further. Patel interrupted yet again, this time louder, his tone sharper, his smirk edging into outright contempt. The cameras zoomed in on his expression, then cut to Crockett, still steady, still waiting. "You see? Jasmine," he said, voice booming, "people like you are all talk. You play the victim. But when it comes to real solutions, you've got nothing." Not loud, but audible. The audience felt the shift instantly. The host's eyebrows rose. The air seemed to tighten, as if the entire studio was holding its breath. Crockett didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, the pause drawing every pair of eyes in the room toward her. Patel, convinced he had landed the decisive blow, leaned back in his chair, his grin wide, his body language triumphant. The cameras caught everything: the arrogance on one side, the gathering composure on the other. And then, as the seconds stretched like an eternity, the tension crystallized. Everyone in the room sensed it, even if they couldn't articulate it. Patel had just crossed an invisible line. The audience knew, the host knew. The crew behind the cameras knew. Jasmine Crockett's eyes lifted, sharp, unflinching. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, and the cliffhanger froze in the air. And then Patel went one step too far. The silence after Patel's last jab was heavy, so heavy it seemed to rattle the air itself. For a fleeting moment, the debate stage didn't feel like a studio. It felt like an arena. Kash Patel leaned back in his chair, chin lifted in smug triumph, confident he had delivered the fatal strike. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't rushed to defend herself. Instead, she let the insult hang in the air like smoke, filling every corner of the room until it became unbearable. The cameras caught the stillness in her face, the sharpness in her eyes. The studio lights reflected a calm intensity that made the audience shift in their seats. And then slow, she leaned forward. "People like me," she repeated, her tone soft but cutting, every syllable deliberate. The pause that followed was excruciating. Even the host leaned back, unsure whether to interject or simply let the moment unfold. Patel's smirk wavered for the first time, just slightly, as if he sensed something wasn't right. Crockett placed her palms on the desk, her voice steady as a drumbeat, carried with the weight of courtroom authority and lived experience. "Let me remind you," she began, "that people like me are the reason people like you don't get away with rewriting history." Gasps. Audible. The kind of collective exhale that only happens when truth slices through the noise. The cameras cut to Patel, his grin faltering into a twitch of disbelief. But Crockett wasn't done. "You call me all talk?" she continued, her voice rising just enough to command the room. "I've spent my career not talking, but fighting in courtrooms, in communities, and in the halls of Congress for people who don't have the luxury of smirking on national television while pretending to care about justice." The audience erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but the kind that crashes like thunder hands slapping together. Cheers breaking through, the live studio transforming into a rally. Patel blinked rapidly, shifting in his chair, his composure unraveling with every second of her monologue. He tried to interject, raising his hand, leaning toward the mic, but the sound was drowned out by the ovation. Crockett waited. She didn't shout over the crowd. She didn't hurry. She let the moment breathe, like a conductor allowing the orchestra to swell before striking the final note. And then, in that perfect stillness, she delivered the line that would go viral within hours. The clip replayed on phones and feeds across America. "See, Kash, when the history books are written, they won't remember the smirk on your face. They'll remember the silence that followed when truth shut you down. Mike dropped the camera, zoomed in on Patel at that exact second. His face drained of color, his mouth half open as though searching for a response that simply wouldn't come. His eyes darted to the host, to the audience, back to Crockett, but no lifeline appeared. The audience gasped again, then erupted, this time louder than before. Applause cascaded like a tidal wave, people standing from their seats, clapping and cheering, some even whistling. It wasn't just approval, it was catharsis. Patel sat frozen. His smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by the unmistakable look of a man caught in the headlights of his own downfall. He shuffled his notes, cleared his throat, tried to lean into the mic again. But his words stumbled out weak, unsteady, stripped of the dominance he had displayed minutes earlier. This isn't about me, he muttered, fumbling. But the cameras had already immortalized his unraveling. The host, struggling to keep composure, adjusted his tie and glanced toward Crockett with wide eyes of silent acknowledgement that the moment had belonged entirely to her, and the broadcast didn't just show it framed it. The production team instinctively cut to slow-motion replay. Patel's smirk. Crockett's calm, leaned forward. The piercing precision of her words. Patel's face collapsing into speechlessness. Graphic at the bottom read, "Live." But what viewers saw felt more like history than real time. Television, narrator-style commentary, practically wrote itself in the silence. The audience gasped. The cameras froze. And Kash Patel, for the first time that night, had no words. Back in the studio, Patel's unraveling became painfully clear. His once confident gestures turned jittery, his attempts to regain control faltering. He shuffled his papers with shaky hands, his gaze darting everywhere but at Crockett. His voice cracked as he tried to spin, to dismiss, to recover, but every syllable fell flat, suffocated under the weight of her comeback. Crockett, meanwhile, sat back, in her chair, calm once again. She didn't gloat. She didn't push further. Her restraint only amplified the victory, proving she hadn't needed to shout or interrupt to win. She had simply waited for the right moment and then struck with surgical precision. The audience, sensing the drama had reached its crescendo, leaned back with satisfied murmurs, as though they had just witnessed not merely a debate but a showdown scripted for the ages. The host finally spoke, voice cracking with nervous laughter. "Well, I think we can all agree that was something. It was more than something. It was the defining moment of the night." A political showdown turned viral legend. Patel, once the confident antagonist, now sat small in his chair, reduced to silence by the very underdog he thought he could bulldoze. And Crockett. She didn't need to say another word. Her comeback had already been written into the narrative, the soundbite that would echo across headlines, YouTube feeds, and late-night monologues. The cameras caught her faint smile one last time before cutting to commercial. A smile not of arrogance, but of quiet certainty. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just defended herself. She'd redefined the debate. She had turned an attempted takedown into a viral triumph. And Kash Patel? He had been left in the one position he never imagined for himself, utterly speechless. Slow motion. Freeze frame. Single caption appears across the screen. The moment truth silence spin. Studio lights dimmed. The segment went to commercial, but the moment was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop comeback, Twitter, or X, as it's now branded, erupted like a wildfire. Clips of her precise takedowns circulated at dizzying speed, racking up tens of thousands of views before the live broadcast had even finished. Hashtags materialized instantly. Hashtag Crockett clapback and hashtag Patel owned. Soon, they weren't just trending. They dominated the top of the platform's charts, spilling into TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. Meme accounts wasted no time. Patel's faltering face was looped and freeze-framed next to captions like, "When you realize the debate is over," and smirk deleted in real time. Split-screen edits paired Crockett's devastating line with reaction gifs of explosions, mic drops and crowds chanting, Oh, then came the celebrity reactions. High-profile comedians tweeted their approval. Somebody call a medic. Kash Patel just got code on live TV. Late-night host couldn't resist. Tonight's top story? Jasmine Crockett taught Kash Patel that sometimes the best soundbite is silence. Even musicians and athletes joined in, reposting clips with laughing emojis, fire emojis, and the now ubiquitous gif of Crockett leaning forward before the strike. But it wasn't just entertainment. Political commentators jumped into the fray. Progressive voices hailed the moment as proof that young, unapologetic leaders like Crockett were the future of American politics. Conservative pundits scrambled to explain Patel's loss of composure, some calling it unfair editing, others dismissing it as gotcha television. Still, the damage was done. The replay didn't lie. By the next morning, the scene dominated. The news cycle. CNN replayed the clip on loop with analysts dissecting Crockett's strategy, her timing, her calm demeanor, her ability to let Patel dig his own rhetorical grave. MSNBC declared it the soundbite of the year, even Fox News. Though critical of Crockett, couldn't resist replaying the moment, inadvertently fueling its reach. The ripple effect was undeniable. Political podcasts devoted entire episodes to the debate, breaking down why Patel usually sharp and combatively so unprepared. Was it overconfidence? Misreading his opponent? Or had he simply underestimated Crockett's ability to deliver? Under pressure? Editorials framed the clash as a symbolic turning point. In an age of political theater, wrote one columnist, authenticity beats arrogance every time. Crockett didn't just win an argument, she shifted the power dynamic. Supporters flooded Crockett's social media with praise, thousands of new followers, comments like "you spoke for all of us," and finally, someone holding them accountable on live TV. Her campaign donation page even saw a spike fueled by energized viewers eager to back the woman who stood her ground. Meanwhile, Patel's camp struggled with damage control. Spokespeople released stiff statements, accusing the media of manipulating a single exchange and ignoring the bigger issues, but the explanations fell flat. Every attempt to redirect attention was drowned out by another remix, another viral edit, another headline reminding audiences of that look on Patel's face when the words failed him. The shockwaves rippled into political strategy circles. Behind closed doors, consultants warned their clients, never underestimate the viral moment. One strategist admitted anonymously, in 2025, debates aren't won on policy papers. They're won lost in 10-second clips that live forever. Online, and Crockett's clip had all the ingredients of a legend. It was dramatic, authentic, unscripted, and perfectly captured on camera. In the age of shareable content, it was political gold. By week's end, the fallout was undeniable. Crockett's name recognition surged. Patel, once confident in his role as a rising conservative firebrand, now carried the shadow of the man. Who got owned on live TV? Commentators began asking, was this the moment his credibility cracked? Would his base rally, or quietly shift their attention elsewhere? For Crockett, the narrative was the opposite. She wasn't just the underdog. Anymore, she was the fighter who stood her ground, the voice who silenced spin with truth. Headlines crowned her as a breakout star. Some even whispered about higher office, suggesting her composure and firepower hinted at bigger ambitions. And for viewers across America, the takeaway was clear. Something real had cut through the noise. In a political landscape dominated by talking points and rehearsed lines, this was raw, unscripted honesty, and it had landed with precision. The clip would be replayed for weeks, remembered, reanalyzed, embedded into TikTok trends and YouTube compilations titled Savage Political Comebacks. But the lasting impact went deeper than laughs or reteds. It shifted perception, because in that one unforgettable moment, the story wasn't just about Crockett or Patel, it was about a changing tide. It's about truth breaking through arrogance, about a younger, underestimated voice rising above an established political operative, about the kind of authenticity that can't be manufactured, only seized, and Jasmine Crockett had seized it. When the noise of the headlines finally settled, and the endless loop of clips slowed into memory, what remained wasn't just a viral comeback. It was something deeper, something that touched the undercurrent of American politics, a reminder of what real leadership looks like. Jasmine Crockett had not only silenced an opponent, she had reframed the entire spectacle. In an arena where sound bites are often weapons, she transformed hers into a lesson. Her words, calm yet cutting, were more than a rebuttal. They became a declaration of values: dignity, truth, and resilience. For viewers who had grown weary of arrogance dressed as authority, the moment was a revelation. Patel's unraveling exposed the hollowness of performative swagger, while Crockett's measured delivery embodied something more enduring. She did not shout. She did not grandstand. She did not lean on theatrics to force a reaction. Instead, she let authenticity do the heavy lifting, and that was the true power of the exchange. In a culture saturated with spin, manipulation, and cheap applause lines, Crockett reminded millions that dignity doesn't just survive the noise, it cuts through it. Her moral victory wasn't about party lines or political camps. It was about the universal hunger for integrity. Every viewer who watched Patel's smirk dissolve into silence understood that what unfolded was bigger than a debate stage. It was the triumph of truth over arrogance, of composure over chaos. Crockett herself, in follow-up interviews, made the message clear. This was never about humiliating someone, she said. It was about standing up for dignity. It was about reminding people that leadership isn't about volume, it's about values. Those words echoed because they tapped into something beyond politics. Americans from across the spectrum, whether they agreed with her policies or not, recognized the humanity in her stance. They recognized the authenticity in refusing to be rattled, in choosing grace over aggression, in using truth as the sharpest blade. In that sense, Crockett's victory was not just hers, it belonged to every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or talked over. It belonged to every young leader told they weren't ready, to every voice drowned out by arrogance, to every underdog who stayed composed while the odds stacked against them. That is why the clip lived on, not merely as a meme, but as a moral marker. Because when the world is loud with spin, silence becomes powerful. When deception shouts dignity, whispers in still, it is heard. The debate reminded audiences that authentic leadership doesn't need theatrics to make an impact. It thrives in resilience. It flourishes in patience. It resonates because it is rooted in truth. Patel's smirk may have crumbled in seconds, but Crockett's words carried forward because they were tethered to something larger than ego. They were tethered to principle. As the final headlines faded, a single lesson crystallized. In a world of noise, dignity still silences deception. That line became more than commentary, it became a mantra. Students quoted it on campuses. Faith leaders folded it into sermons. Activists lifted it onto protest signs. For many, it wasn't about politics at all, it was about life. The idea that grace under pressure, paired with unflinching truth, can defeat even the loudest arrogance, struck a universal chord. And so the story ended not as a tale of one politician besting another, but as a parable of resilience. Crockett, cast as the underdog, revealed what the cameras had captured was not just a gotcha moment. It was the proof that authenticity, when tested, endures. In the end, this was more than a debate. It was a mirror reflecting what people crave in their leaders and in themselves. Strength that doesn't need spectacle, truth that doesn't tremble, dignity that doesn't break. Because when the lights dim, the cameras shut off, and the hashtags fade. What survives is not the arrogance of performance, but the quiet force of authenticity. And Jasmine Crockett showed the world that sometimes the most devastating victory is not loud at all, it is dignified. Jasmine Crockett stunned Kash Patel, but more than that, she stunned America. What began as a heated exchange ended as a defining moment. Patel's smirk collapsed, his certainty shattered. And the audience witnessed something rare in modern politics, truth cutting through spin with surgical precision. Crockett's words were more than a comeback. They were a reminder that dignity and composure can silence arrogance louder than any microphone ever could. This wasn't just another debate clip. It was a turning point, a viral flashpoint that left millions rethinking the balance between power and principle. In an era where noise dominates, Crockett's calm presence spoke volumes. She didn't just win the room, she won the narrative. That's the heartbeat of Power Pulse, capturing the drama, the tension, and the shocking moments where justice speaks louder than spin. Every clash tells a story. Every showdown reveals character. And every mic drop reminds us that politics isn't just about policies, it's about people, it's choices, and the values we stand for. If this moment left you reeling, inspired, or even questioning, then you're in the right place. Because here, we don't just replay politics, we dissect the drama, amplify the truth, and spotlight the battles that shape America's pulse. So don't just watch from the sidelines. Join the conversation. Stay ahead of the moments everyone will be talking about tomorrow. Subscribe to Power Pulse today and witness more epic confrontations, shocking revelations, and unforgettable stories where justice rises above deception. Because sometimes one voice can shake the room. Here at Power Pulse, we make sure you never miss it.